Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin makes clear one of his obsessions during that joint press conference with President Trump. And what is the strategy for House Republicans to keep control of the House as we witness a rising interest in democratic socialism ahead of the midterm elections? Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Maria Bartiromo, and this is Sunday Morning Futures. President Trump responds this morning to the Justice Department releasing more than 400 pages of documents related to the 2016 FISA application for former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. It shows that infamous Steele dossier was, in fact, the major component for the surveillance warrant. Fresh reaction from both House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte and Alan Dershowitz coming up this morning. Vladimir Putin called him out by the name during the Helsinki news conference by President Trump. Today, Bill Browder responds to the Russian leader. He'll join me live. And the midterm races heating up. I will speak exclusively with House Majority Whip Steve Scalise about the Republican leadership strategy to keep control of the House. All that and a lot more right now as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. And top of the news right now, the Justice Department making its first public disclosure of a highly sensitive FISA request by releasing the heavily redacted version of the documents relating to that FISA warrant against former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page. The 400-plus pages were released as a result of lawsuits filed by several media organizations, including Judicial Watch. The documents reveal major components in the FBI surveillance requests leading up to the 2016 presidential election. They were memos written by Christopher Steele. That is what they used to get the warrant. The former British intelligence officer hired by a research firm working for Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton. The president reacting on Twitter early this morning, saying this: "Congratulations to @Judicial Watch and @Tom Fitton on being successful in getting the Carter Page FISA documents. As usual, they are ridiculously heavily redacted, but confirm with little doubt that the Department of Justice and the FBI misled the courts, witch hunt, rigged a scam." The president later tweeted this: "Looking more and more like the Trump campaign for president was illegally being spied upon, surveillance for the political gain of crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Ask her how that worked out. She did better with crazy Bernie. Republicans must get tough now, an illegal scam." Joining me right now with his first reaction to all of this is House Judiciary Committee Chairman and Virginia Republican Congressman Bob Goodlatte. Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. It's good to be with you.
Well, what strikes me about all of these documents that I've been looking at all morning is all of the redactions on every page, major black lines redacted. So tell us, what did we learn from this FISA warrant?
Well, we certainly learned that there is a serious problem with the FBI presenting to the FISA court an application for a search warrant against a United States citizen, and then followed by 3 renewals when they were basing it on a very flawed document, the so-called Steele dossier that has never been verified. Even after all of this came out, they attempted to verify it and failed. So that's number one. Number two, I have had the opportunity, as have a few other members of the House of Representatives, the opportunity to read these FISA warrant applications without all of those redactions. There are only a few redactions in the document that I reviewed, and I think it is critically important that the American people have the opportunity to see most of the rest of those documents. We want to make sure that we're protecting sources. We want to make sure that we're protecting methods that are used in investigations. But most of the information that is redacted in that report should easily be seen by the American people. They can judge for themselves, but I will tell you it does not support the issuance of a warrant against Mr. Page.
So what will be done about it?
Well, certainly this is a big development for the investigation that I, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Trey Gowdy, as chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, have been pursuing now for the last 9 months. Because, as you know, at each step in that process, the FBI has objected to our looking into this matter because they claim it's part of an ongoing investigation. And we have said all along, we're not interested in looking at the substance of anything that Mr. Mueller does find in his investigation. We don't want to interfere with that. But we do want to see how this investigation was was launched and how it contrasts with the shocking way that they handled the Hillary Clinton email investigation. So that is an absolutely critical aspect of this, and now we have a federal judge who agrees that information regarding that investigation can and should be made public and has ordered it to be made public. Much more needs to be done in that regard, but the Congress, which has subpoena power and has issued subpoenas with regard to both documents and witnesses, is entitled to have answers to our questions, and I think that this is a major boost to that effort. There was
one redaction here about an agent. Are we agent launching this investigation? Are we assuming that that is Peter Strzok, who's also his name redacted in this warrant?
Well, I can't comment on the redacted items in that until a court has ordered them to be made public. But I can say that based upon our other aspects of this investigation, that Peter Strzok was at the heart of both the Hillary Clinton email investigation, where the FBI bent over backwards to find every way possible to not proceed with that case. And in fact, as you know, they did decide in a very public and controversial way not to proceed in that investigation. And he was also at the heart of the beginning of this investigation into so-called Trump campaign Russia collusion.
I want to know what this tells us about the Robert Mueller probe, because you go back to Carter Page, and here's the guy who was actually wiretapped and surveilled. If Carter Page was an agent of a foreign power working for the Russians, why is he still running around free? Why are there no charges against Carter Page? And by the way, what does that say about Comey, McCabe, Yates, Rosenstein, and the others who repeatedly certified to the court that he was an agent of foreign power? Why has he not been charged then?
Well, excellent question. He was surveilled for a solid year. 3-month increments with 3 renewals, and I don't believe they found anything with regard to him. I cannot speak for him, and I can't speak for Special Counsel Mueller. And as I've said before, he has been charged with a responsibility to carry out, and if he finds evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, he should bring it forward. This investigation is now more than 2 years old, and it is, I think, he's only been on the job for a little over a year, but this was going on for almost a year before he came on the scene. And still it is a cloud, a shadow over this administration. It is something that if they have the goods, as Chairman Gowdy has said, bring them to a grand jury. If you don't, let's let the world know that they don't have that evidence.
I want to run for you what Senator Rand Paul said on Fox News this past week, because I'm wondering if this information and all that we're gleaning from all of this, whether it's the FISA warrant or your interactions with Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, which I'm going to get to, if that is going to dictate where the Robert Mueller investigation goes. You would think that it would, since his mandate is collusion with the Russians. Here's what Senator Rand Paul said about all of this week on Fox News. Listen to this, Mr. Chairman.
The president sees the Mueller investigation. He sees all these accusations from partisan Democrats, Hillary Clinton saying, oh, he colluded with the Russians. But then he also sees that the only people who actually we know colluded with the Russians were Hillary Clinton, who paid a British agent who then paid Russians for information for this dossier. So he feels like the intelligence community cooked up a political or partisan investigation.
Would Robert Mueller interview Hillary Clinton?
Well, I can't speak for Robert Mueller, but I can very heartily agree with Senator Paul when he says that Democratic operatives related to the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid for the creation of this so-called Steele dossier and then turned it over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But what's so unprecedented about this is that the FBI then took it, weaponized it without ever verifying its credibility, and brought it to the FISA court without disclosing the source of that information. That is deeply troubling, and it is a part of the reason why the new FBI director has been hard at work trying to reform this organization whose credibility has been damaged by a few key people. And by the way, those few key people are the same people in both of these investigations. James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, the FBI counsel, the chief of staff to the director, the same people in both of these investigations, in one instance doing everything possible to avoid indicting Hillary Clinton, including allowing her chief aides to be in the room with her when she was interviewed by the FBI, creating a memo exonerating her before most of the witnesses, including Secretary Clinton, had been interviewed. Not putting this before a grand jury, even though they had impaneled a grand jury in that investigation. They didn't let the grand jury determine whether she should be indicted. And then changing the language in the memo from gross negligence to extreme carelessness. Gross negligence very closely tracks the statute. Extreme carelessness is not a meaningful phrase, all to avoid indicting her.
Yeah.
That is shocking.
And many of the people that you mentioned, they have signed, they're on the signage page of this FISA warrant, they all signed it, okaying it, and that includes John Brennan, Sally Yates, John Brennan, Jim Comey, Peter Strzok. So John Brennan, he is the man who deserves a belated bit of scrutiny, according to the Wall Street Journal, Kim Strassel's op-ed just this past week. We know that John Brennan has been all over town trashing President Trump and trashing the hearing that your committee actually did with Peter Strzok. What are your thoughts on John Brennan's involvement?
Well, we have lots of questions for John Brennan, and he will definitely be sought by the committees for an interview. This is an extremely disturbing thing to see both he and James Comey, supposedly impartial government officials carrying out their jobs in very important areas in intelligence gathering and law enforcement, express the kind of extreme bias that they've shown now, which I think reflects quite accurately on what they were doing back in 2016.
So he's on your list of witnesses to have in to interview them?
Absolutely.
Who else is on
Definitely.
that list?
Well, we're going to go through. We've received a list from the Intelligence Committee of literally dozens of people. We're going through that list now and determining which ones are our priority. I think I would rather leave it at that, but certainly we will also be talking to Director Comey and former Attorney General Lynch. Let
me ask you about Lisa Page. I know that you had behind closed door meetings with her, but apparently during that hearing you have discovered more information that you want. Can you tell us anything about the Lisa Page testimony and what you learned?
Well, it was a private, confidential interview, but I will say this, that Ms. Page, in contrast to Mr. Strzok, was far more forthcoming and gave us far more information regarding what was going on in 2016 and into 2017 to help our investigation. But I'll also say that she reminded us of some documents that hadn't been talked about for a while, including the fact that there are not only memos by James Comey that we're all aware of, but also memos by Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, that are of interest to us as well, and we're seeking those now.
So now you're seeking those documents. I know that you have been focused, and certainly your colleague Devin Nunes has been focused on any information before the actual investigation was launched, which was July 31, 2016. Mr. Chairman, I want to take a short break, and then I want to come back to that. We also have much to discuss with you, including that showdown with Democrats over a House resolution to support ICE. We'll be right back with Chairman Goodlatte. Follow me on Twitter at Maria Bartiromo at Sunday Futures. Let us know what you'd like to hear from Chairman Goodlatte. And of course, one text from Peter Strzok to Lisa Page that basically says there's no there when the Robert Mueller investigation launched, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, we'll keep following that. Let me move on to immigration. You've been working, obviously, with two bills. Are you going to be able to get one of them across the finish line before the midterm elections? What are your expectations there, Mr. Chairman?
Well, you know, Maria, 224 House Republicans, all but 12 of the Republicans in the House, have voted for one of the two measures that we offered. Unfortunately, neither one got to 218. One got to 193, just 21 votes short of what was the majority that day.
Right.
And there are many members hard at work trying to make sure that we bring some of the measures from the second one into the first one and get over 218 votes. That would be huge.
Okay, well, we'll wait for that. And real quick, I know you had some technology executives in a hearing as well. You are looking at the editing of information, conservative ideas. Tell us what you're looking at in terms of technology CEOs and where you are in that regard. Real quick, sir.
Well, we held a hearing last week with representatives from Facebook, Google, and Twitter, in the case of Google, particularly YouTube, regarding their censorship policies, which they do on all three of those social media platforms. And we have had the opportunity to ask some very probing questions about how it is that they have liability
Mr.
protections.
Chairman, we're going to be looking at this. Thank you so much. Good to see you, sir. Chairman Goodlatte, we'll be right back. On a non-binding resolution to oppose giving Russia access to U.S. officials. Vladimir Putin making the proposal in exchange for allowing special counsel Robert Mueller access to the 12 Russians indicted by the Justice Department. Putin made the suggestion during that Helsinki news conference with President Trump, calling out my next guest by name. Watch this.
We can actually permit official representatives of the United States, including the members of this very commission headed by Mr. Mueller, we can let them into the country and they will be present at this questioning. Then we would expect that the Americans would reciprocate, and we can bring up Mr. Browder in this particular case.
Bring up Mr. Browder in this particular case. Joining us right now is the man, Bill Browder. He is the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management and a thorn in Putin's side now for several years. Bill, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Look, I know you a lot of years, Bill, and we've talked about your story for a lot of years. But even then, for me, after knowing the story as well as I do, I got chills down my back when I heard Vladimir Putin mention your name. What did you think?
Well, I should point out that he's been mentioning my name on a regular basis for the last 6 years. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Vladimir Putin is obsessed with me. He's obsessed because I was the one responsible for getting the Magnitsky Act passed in 2012, which sanctions Putin and his corrupt cronies for human rights violations, and he hates that.
So tell us about that, because just to briefly go through your story, at one point you were one of the leading investors in Russia. You owned a lot of Russian companies, Russian stocks in your Hermitage Capital Fund. You were living between Moscow and London. You were traveling back and forth all the time. When you became aware of corruption going on, oligarchs stealing money from Russian companies, you wanted it stopped. You started to become more of an active investor, calling out this. And then what happened, Bill?
Well, so after exposing corruption in these big companies like Gazprom, Putin expelled me from the country, declared me a threat to national security. The police then raided my offices in Moscow, seized all my documents. I had a young lawyer named Sergei Magnitsky start to investigate, and he figured out that they seized those documents to steal $230 million of taxes that we paid to the Russian government. He exposed it. He was then arrested by some of the people he exposed, put in pretrial detention, tortured for 358 days, and then killed at the age of 37 in a Russian prison on November 16th, 2009.
Wow.
And since then, I put aside everything else I'm doing on a mission to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky, which has resulted in the Magnitsky Act, which Putin hates me so much for.
And the Magnitsky Act basically protects companies and punishes those who try to have fraud and stealing of the wealth by the oligarchs. And Putin is upset by that. Let's show you the Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote a piece about you this weekend saying Donald Trump meet Bill Browder. It begins like this. Vladimir Putin knows what he wants from Donald Trump, and one priority is help in silencing businessman and human rights advocate Bill Browder. Someone should tell Mr. Trump that he and Mr. Browder were both targeted by Fusion GPS, the political gun for hire that midwife the Steele dossier in 2016. Tell us what happened with you and Fusion GPS, Bill.
So just a little bit of background on the story. So the Department of Justice discovered that that there was some of the money from the Magnitsky case in New York. They opened up a criminal case against a Russian oligarch, and Fusion GPS came in to work for the Russian oligarch, for Natalia Veselnitskaya, who is the Russian oligarch's lawyer. So Fusion GPS, the firm that did the Trump dossier, started to do a smear campaign on me. And they put together all of Natalia Veselnitskaya's talking points about me for the Trump Tower meeting where she went in to speak with Donald Trump Jr. And I would deduce that Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson therefore put together the same talking points for Vladimir Putin because they were the same talking points in Trump Tower. So in that Helsinki meeting last week, Vladimir Putin said a whole bunch of stuff about me. And as far as I can tell, I think that those talking points came from Glenn Simpson.
Well, the Senate voted down any idea that the Russians would be able to question you. And Donald Trump obviously agreed with that. So that's not happening. But I've seen some of your quotes in the press. You're afraid that if, in fact, that were to happen, you're a dead man.
Well, basically, even if there's only a 1% chance of it happening, if I get handed over to the Russians and to Vladimir Putin, I will be killed. There's no question about it. They made death threats on a number of occasions. A number of other people connected to this case have either been killed or attempted to be killed. Vladimir Putin wants me dead. This is not. This is a very serious matter.
Now, the charges that he levels against you, which were all debunked, we should say, but he says you avoided taxes in Russia and in the U.S. and that you gave hundreds of millions of dollars to Hillary Clinton. Your reaction?
Well, he's been throwing out charges against me like candy. These particular charges have been analyzed by the U.S. Department of Justice, by the British government, by Interpol, by the German government, and have all been rejected outright. It's just complete nonsense. In terms of the Hillary Clinton campaign contributions, I've given zero contributions to Hillary Clinton in any campaign. I do not make U.S. campaign contributions. And in fact, this $400 million number that he threw out, they then walked back to $400,000 the next day, and the real number is zero.
You know, it's an interesting situation because when you look at the past in terms of Vladimir Putin, there's your story, there's Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Garry Kasparov, the chess champion, was thrown in jail, not to mention the endless number of murders of journalists in Russia and enemies of Putin. Then again, Russia and the U.S. control 90% of the world's nuclear capability. What does President Trump do? He has to work with the other partner of the nuclear capability, no? But it's important to put a picture together of who Vladimir Putin is.
Well, I think that President Trump should do what Ronald Reagan did. I mean, Russia and the Soviet Union have had these nuclear warheads for a long time. Ronald Reagan knew what to do, which was to contain the Soviet Union, and Donald Trump should contain Russia. This is not, you don't make friends and buddy-buddy up to a hostile, malign power. And that's what that 98-0 vote was about, and every other vote in Congress about Russia. This is not a partisan thing. This is it's un-American to do anything other than contain Vladimir Putin.
It feels at this point we are seeing a new era, and it seems that the president understands who this person is. But we will keep watching that. Bill Browder, it's good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks very much. And we are not saying where you are coming to us from. We understand the danger you are in. Next up, House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Stay with us. In the House with me now in an exclusive interview is House Majority Whip and Republican Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise. Congressman, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning. Always great to be with you, Maria.
So what is the plan to retain control of the House from your standpoint?
The plan's to continue focusing on getting the economy moving, seeing this great economic growth, and then locking it in. We're going to bring some more bills to cut taxes. We're going to make the tax cuts permanent. That bill Chairman Brady and his committee are already working on. We just did a Jobs 3.0 bill, a bill to provide more regulatory relief and do some more things that will help create more jobs and rebuild the middle class. And look, it's a stark contrast with the radical left's agenda right now in Washington. I mean, Pelosi is talking about raising taxes, She's talking about abolishing ICE, single-payer health care. That's not the direction we need to go. So let's keep the economy moving. We're going to continue focusing on it this week. We're going to bring a bill to repeal the medical device tax, push back the health insurance taxes, the HIT tax, some of these things that are hurting health care in this country. Let's focus on getting the economy moving.
And by the way, the economy is going to show movement this week. We get the GDP number out on Thursday, and all expectations call for a second quarter GDP number of 4%, largely as a result of some of the rollback in regulations and the tax cut plan. I want to talk about what the Democrats, though, are going to do in response to that. Joe Lieberman, former senator, wrote an op-ed, and Lieberman writes this in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this week: "Vote Joe Crowley for working families." It begins with this quote: "Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's surprise primary victory over Representative Joe Crowley seems likely to hurt Congress, America, and the Democratic Party. It doesn't have to." What Lieberman writes is that he's hoping that Crowley's name is on the ballot because the idea to abolish ICE came from her, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, says she's the future of the party.
Well, I hope she is, because it shows such a dramatic shift to the radical left. That's not where America is. America's still a center-right country. And you saw she was out there with Bernie Sanders going through the Midwest, going to Missouri. You know, she was in Kansas City. They're trying to push this idea of abolishing ICE, of all things. I mean, think about this, Maria. The very people who keep our country safe. ICE has been directly responsible for stopping human trafficking, stopping and saving some of these kids that are being exploited from human trafficking. And they want to get rid of them. They want open borders. That's not what this country is all about. I hope they keep going around and letting people know that's what they would do if they were in the majority.
I don't understand the idea of open borders. I mean, it's really questionable in terms of that being a platform to run on. In terms of immigration and your efforts, we just heard from Bob Goodlatte. Are you going to be able to come up with a plan that protects the DACA recipients, but also protects this country with the proper security in terms of securing the borders?
Well, Maria, we've had two different bills we brought to the floor that would do just that. And as you heard Chairman Goodlatte say, we've had large numbers of Republicans vote for it, but not one Democrat. So when you have, between the two bills, 224 Republicans voting yes to build the wall, secure the border, solve the DACA problem, and the visa lottery system, and not one Democrat could find a way to vote for any of those bills, it shows you they don't want to solve this problem, and we do. We'll keep working on it, but let's look at those votes, Maria, to show there are serious Republican plans to secure this country's border, and every single Democrat voted no because Nancy Pelosi bullied him and threatened him and said she didn't want to provide Donald Trump with a win. That's not, again, that's not what this country is all about. Some of the great things President Trump has done, working with us to cut taxes, to get the economy moving, to bring regulations under control, it's actually working. They should want to join with us to keep that going. To be opposed to the things that are helping rebuild our middle class is a losing strategy for Democrats.
And in a also foreign policy, you look at some of the outcomes that have come. Jim Mattis apparently saying that the NATO meeting was among the most successful meetings that he's ever seen. Your thoughts on the president's relationship with Vladimir Putin and what the U.S. needs to do with Russia, given these horrible stories we just heard about Putin from Bill Browder?
Yeah, Putin is a bad guy. He's not our friend. I think what you got to look at are the actions that President Trump has taken to stand up against Putin and to stand up against Russia, and they're significant, Maria. If you start with the Ukraine, they're our friend in Eastern Europe. You saw Putin rolling through Crimea, moving into Eastern Europe, and Barack Obama sat on the sidelines. Those countries, by the way, the Ukrainians, they didn't say give us boots on the ground. They said, can you just sell us arms so we can push back against the Russians' aggression and bomb their tanks? And Obama said no. President Trump said yes and actually sold them those missiles so that they can defend their country and push Russia out of Eastern Europe. Yeah. And that's happening right now. He kicked out diplomats. He increased sanctions against Russia. That's standing up to Russia. We need to keep reminding Russia they're not our friend. They need to get out of Syria. They need to stop allying with some of these rogue countries.
Kevin Brady was on this program last week, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He said he's going to try to get a vote on tax cuts 2.0 to the floor in September. Do you think you'll need Democratic support here? Is anybody going to vote for tax cuts 2.0 when they're complaining about deficits and they didn't vote for tax cuts 1?
every single Democrat should vote for tax cuts 2.0.
But they won't.
Because it's worked for our economy, but they probably won't, Maria. And look, we're going to go forward anyway. What Chairman Brady's doing, I think, is important work. He was down at the White House just a few days ago working with President Trump to make sure that the cuts include all the things we want to do to keep this economy growing.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing historic growth. Let's keep it going. We're going to have a bill on the floor to do just that in September, and it'll pass the House. The real question is, will every Democrat vote no like they did last time, now knowing how well it's working for middle-class families?
It's a win for President Trump, for sure. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks so much.
Great being back with you, Maria.
We appreciate you joining us, Congressman Steve Scalise there. The Department of Justice released heavily redacted documents last night relating to the surveillance warrant against a former Trump campaign aide. So what, if anything, do these documents tell us? Alan Dershowitz weighs in next as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures right now. Today, the Justice Department released top secret documents on the FISA warrant sought for the Trump campaign aide Carter Page. The release of the heavily redacted 412-page report comes in response to several Freedom of Information lawsuits. It shows the FBI relied on the discredited Steele dossier as a major component to apply for a surveillance warrant on Carter Page. For his part, Page is maintaining his innocence. My next guest is the author of the new book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz joins me right now. And Alan, it's good to see you this morning. Your reaction to what we've received in terms of this FISA warrant, which is heavily redacted, every page, massive black spots. What do you think?
Well, I'm used to seeing redacted information. I would say 90% of redactions are generally designed to cover people's incompetence, and they're not national security. And I think you should have an objective, neutral person go through the redactions and always err in favor of publicly releasing and transparency rather than secrecy. But what it also shows us is that there is potentially a violation of a United States Supreme Court decision called Franks versus Maryland and its progeny. That case says when you make an application for a warrant, you have to be truthful. And if you omit important information or fail to disclose information that might discredit the source, there's a real legal problem. And here, of course, we know that the Steele dossier, we know how it was obtained, we know the circumstances, and the FISA court didn't know those pieces of information, should have known it. And the question really is, was there other information sufficient beyond the Steele dossier to justify intruding on the privacy rights of an American citizen?
That's
we
right.
don't know enough yet to answer that question.
Well, I mean, we know that one other piece of information used was a Yahoo article about the Steele dossier. So it was all based on the Steele dossier, and then they re-upped it and they had to get additional sign-offs on it 3 times with the same information. Normally, you would, when you go to re-up a warrant, you have new information. It's all based on the dossier. Look, is it high time we all admit that the Obama administration spied on the Trump campaign because it was a political enemy and there was an election?
Well, I'd like to know more about that. That's why right from day one I called for an independent, nonpartisan, expert investigating commission that would look at the entire 2016 election, ranging from Comey's statements to Strzok to whether the Obama administration put a spy in the camp. All of these things are relevant to all Americans, and they're nonpartisan. We want to see fair elections. We don't want to see the thumb of any FBI agents, Justice Department officials, Russia, Comey. We don't want to see that thumb, even that pinky, on the scale of our own elections. And we're not learning this from the Mueller report.
I mean, it certainly doesn't feel good. It feels like it's rigged, this whole thing. What happens now in your estimation, based on what we know from Peter Strzok, what we know about the hearings in terms of Lisa Page, and, of course, all of these texts?
Well, we'll see, first of all, whether any of this appears in Mueller's report, because there's going to be a report. But there are also indictments, and there'll be some contested cases. And in the contested cases, lawyers have a gold mine to work with, defense lawyers, challenging this FISA application, challenging Strzok's objectivity. All of this will become a basis for legal proceedings and legal challenges. We've already seen Judge Ellis in Virginia question the special counsel. Wonder whether not only are they trying to make people sing, but also make them compose. The process is a very flawed one, and the more the American people know about it, the more distressed they are at how special counsel operate, particularly in the context of political elections. We need to know more, not less. We need less redaction, more transparency, and we have the right to judge for ourselves whether our system of justice is operating fairly within the Constitution and consistent with civil liberties. Right now, there are questions, more questions than answers.
There sure are. All right, we're going to keep watching that and wonder when the Robert Mueller report will be out. We're waiting on that, of course. Good to see you, Alan. Thanks very much for weighing in this morning.
Oh, thank you so much.
Alan Dershowitz joining us. We'll be right back with our all-star panel on all of that. Back in a minute. On that, Ed Rollins is a former Reagan-Bush campaign manager. James Freeman is an assistant editor for the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Both are Fox News contributors, and it is a pleasure to see you both.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Your reaction to what we've heard this morning, Ed Rollins?
The truth of the matter is what we've discovered with this document and the Strzok testimony, what have you. Hillary was never a target of any investigation. I mean, Strzok admitted that. She was never under investigation. They clearly, Strzok, I think, was one of the instruments of really going after the Trump campaign, and he's trying to woo his girlfriend, and basically she was a very anti-Trump. Brennan was an anti-Trump person, and my sense is that they used this idiotic document that was an opposition research document to go violate the FISA rules and all the rest of it. And this whole thing got started. Carter Page is not an operative for the Soviet Union. The problem was the Trump campaign did not have the big, significant foreign policy people. These were all kinds of fringe players, and I think to a certain extent they got Paul Manafort on past sins. Right. That'll all be the next week's trial will start. But I think the reality is there was no there, and the American public.
That was one of the texts. Right. There's no there.
So there.
Peter Strzok said it. But you mentioned Carter Page. If Carter Page was an agent of foreign power, why is he still running around with no charges, James? I mean, there are no charges.
Right. It's been 2 years now. And as you mentioned, a lot of black marker, a lot of redactions in these documents. But one thing that does come through is it appears that the dossier was central to it. And when they weren't relying on the dossier, they were appealing to the authority of Yahoo News without pointing out that that was a Steele story as well in terms of the source. Now, why do they continue to say that Steele is credible after they even acknowledge in their reapplications that he didn't do as he was told and he was sharing information with the media? That's a question. So I think this is another argument for the president to declassify everything. Get it out there. Enough of the redactions. Let's see the whole FISA applications. Let's see what are known as the Woods notes, where the FBI goes through and figures out what they can put in the FISA document. Yeah. We need to see where this came from.
And the editorial report did an op-ed on that, asking the president to actually make sure that you declassify these documents. Is this going to hurt the Dems in the midterms?
I think it will, because they're arguing things that aren't valid to the American public. And equally as important, their party's getting so far to the left that if Republicans who have a lot of open seats and a lot of challenge seats, if they go out and talk about the president's programs of getting the economy moving, what have you, they'll do fine. But they can't make it a national campaign. They got to make it a local campaign.
Right. And we're going to get the GDP number out on Thursday, James, and it may very well show 4% growth. The outcomes that this president has had are very positive, and they're insane over it.
Yeah, well, going back to how 2 years later there's nothing on Carter Page. 2 years later, we're asked to believe that this was some secret Russian plot to revive the American economy and rebuild the U.S. military and strengthen Ukraine to resist Russian expansionism. So it gets harder and harder to believe. And I think the president and his Republican allies in Congress have a pretty strong case on the economy.
The one thing is the Russians were trying to play here, and they have tried to play here for a long time, and they got more publicity this time because there were all these investigations.
Yeah, and because they tried to implicate Trump in it. We know Russia has been trying to undermine the West for a long time.
And not effective.
Trump had nothing to do with it. Great to see you both. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you next week.
For years, I've trained dogs.